everyone, and welcome back. I'm Rick Fussell and this is the Ingrain Workshop. In today's video, I'm going to be doing an update video. I'm going to be updating the 4 most important improvements that I did for my workshop. Starting out with the rigid insulation that I installed, the mini split system, my air filtration system, and lastly, the upgrade that I did to my dust collection system. That's coming up next here at the Ingrain Workshop. Okay, so my workshop is a metal building. It's approximately 25 feet wide by 30 feet long, and the walls are approximately 10 feet high. I've got 2 walk-through doors. I've got 1 10-foot roll-up door, and then I've got 2 exterior windows. This building was built by Carolina Carports back in 2010. So it's approximately 13 years old. My workshop is located in central southwest Florida, generally in the Tampa Bay area, where we have a somewhat harsh climate. We've got approximately 6 months of summer, 3 months of hurricane season, a month of fall, a month of winter, and then a month of spring. So typically inside the metal building during the summertime, you would see roughly a 5 to 7 degree change in temperature or delta between the exterior temperature and the interior temperature. So for example, if it was 95 degrees outside in the dead of summer, it would be at least 100 degrees here inside the workshop due to the radiant heat. The metal walls and roof of the workshop heated up during the middle of the day, and then that heat radiated inside the workshop, causing an increase in temperature. In the wintertime, it would be just the opposite. You'd see a 5 to 7 degree change in temperature from the exterior to the interior. For example, if it was 45 degrees outside, it would be 40 degrees inside. So that's the situation that I had going on inside my metal building before I did anything. And that worked out great for a couple of years, but I also was limited to the time I could work in the workshop. During the summertime, I'd have to get in here at 6 o'clock in the morning, and I needed to be done by 10, 11 o'clock, because after that it would just be too hot to work inside my workshop. And due to the heat, even with the roll-up door, the walk-up doors wide open, and a 36-inch fan blowing, it was just too hot. I was sweating all over the cast iron tops for my tabletop, my miter saw, bandsaw. They all had sweat droplets that slowly turned into rust. And you know, it just was too irritating to work in the heat. So I would have to dog it off probably around 11 o'clock. Granted, in the fall, winter, spring months, you could extend your day working out here. But for the most part, for the 6 months of summer and possibly the 3 months of hurricane season, you were limited to the amount of time that you could work out here in the workshop, which is why I decided to put in the rigid insulation. So I'll leave a link here to the installation video of the rigid insulation, and I'll also leave a link in the video description below, and you can check that out if you want to see the details on how I actually installed the insulation. I used 2-inch rigid insulation in the walls and 3-inch rigid insulation in the roof or the ceiling area. And then I also, on average, left a 1-inch air gap between the insulation and the metal siding for the wall and the metal siding that's on the roof. You need that air gap because that will reduce the condensation that you're going to have. In my instance, because of the heat here in Florida, I've had 0, and this is one of the comments I have to respond to a lot, I have 0 condensation issues. Because of that air gap, any condensation that might, any humidity that's in the air that might decide to try to condensate, generally gets evaporated from the heat that's in that air gap. So this is I've just completed my 2nd summer with the rigid insulation installed in the metal building. and I've had zero issues with condensation. Now, as far as using rigid insulation versus spray insulation, I really can't give you any advice other than rigid insulation is going to probably be 2 to 3, maybe even 4 times cheaper than using the spray insulation. And the rigid insulation is also a DIY project that you can do yourself. You can probably do the sprayed insulation as well, but it's going to cost you a lot more money, and I don't know if that's worth the extra cost. As far as the rigid insulation goes, it took me 30 sheets to do the walls, and I believe 35 sheets to do the ceiling. So it took a roughly 65 sheets of 2-inch and, like I said, 3-inch in the ceiling at an average cost of $27 a sheet. It ended up running me roughly $1,700 to $1,800 for just the rigid insulation. Once I got the rigid insulation installed, I was very skeptical. I really didn't think the rigid insulation was going to make that big of a difference. But believe it or not, it made a huge difference with the temperature and the climate control within the building. Now again, this is just after installing the rigid insulation. So after installing the rigid insulation, you still had a change in temperature between the exterior and interior of approximately 5 to 7 degrees. However, it was reversed. So for example, during the summer, if it was 95 degrees outside, inside it would be around 90 degrees. Same thing in the wintertime. If it was 40, or say it was 40 degrees outside, it would be 45 degrees inside. So that was a complete reverse with the rigid insulation versus no insulation. And again, that's just with the insulation. And I thought that was a big improvement. I know a lot of people probably don't think 5 or 7 degrees is that huge of a difference, but it really is. And it took the workshop longer to heat up in the summertime, so then I could, work maybe until 1 o'clock before it would get too hot that I couldn't work. And again, I took my time. I'd only did this on the weekends. I might go to the big box store and pick up 10 sheets at a time, 5 sheets at a time, and just put them in as I could afford it over a couple of months. So that's the update on the rigid insulation. There's been no condensation. It made a huge difference as far as the change in temperature between the exterior and the interior. And as far as the cost goes, for $1,700, $1,800, I didn't consider that a huge expense. But I also knew that I wasn't just going to settle on rigid insulation. I was also going to do a mini split system and condition the air inside the workshop. But before I move on to that, I did want to also mention that when you do the rigid insulation, it comes with a reflective full backing. So my objective for my workshop was to keep the heat out of the workshop. So I decided to take the reflective side of the rigid insulation and face it out. That way I could reflect the radiant heat that was trying to enter the workshop and reflect it back out to keep it out of the workshop altogether. I think that made a huge impact. Now, if you're in a northern climate where it's just the opposite, where you might be getting 6 months of winter or 9 months of winter, then you might want to reverse that. You might want to take that reflective backing on the insulation and face it toward the inside of your workshop. That way, whatever your heat source is, a wood burning stove or a propane heater, wherever you're generating your heat, it's going to want to reflect back inside the workshop, and it might be more energy efficient for you to keep the heat inside the workshop, because your objective would be to keep the cold out, whereas mine is to keep the heat out. So those are just a couple of things to consider when installing your rigid insulation. But all in all, it was definitely worth the $1,700 to $1,800 expense to install the rigid insulation. And again, it's a DIY project that you can do on your own, and it didn't take that much time. Okay, so let's take a look at the whiteboard, and I can probably explain it a little bit better, and you can pause the video or take a screenshot. But basically, this is my metal building. It's 25 by 30. The ceiling height is 10 feet. The framing of the metal building is 2.5-inch galvanized tubing, and that's what's used for the walls and for the trusses. And then there's metal siding on the exterior of the walls and on the roof. And then there's also these little roof purlins or hi-hats that run parallel to the building, and that's what secures the metal siding on the roof. And this siding is ribbed, and I think the ribs are probably 3/4 to 1-inch ribs. So as a detail of the wall here, you've got the 2.5-inch galvanized tube, and then I've installed the 2-inch rigid insulation, just wedged it between the studs, and that leaves you with about, or left me with about, a 1-inch air gap. Between the 1/2-inch air gap and then the 1-inch rib, on average you've got about a 1-inch air gap, and that seems to be sufficient and hasn't caused any condensation issues. Now the roof detail, you've got the same 2.5-inch galvanized tubing that makes up the roof truss. Then you've got the purlin or the hi-hat, which gives you probably another inch between the top cord of the truss and then the actual roof decking. So that's why in this situation here, I was able to install 2 inches of rigid insulation and then a 1-inch rigid insulation on top of that, and then still be left with a 1-inch air gap. So I took advantage of the space provided by the purlin and installed another inch of rigid insulation, giving me 3 inches. I think the total R value in the ceiling is 11, and the R value in the walls are 7. And as you can see here, I get exterior airflow from the eaves on both sides of the building. So whatever heat radiates into the ceiling, at least, is going to be captured in the attic space, because I've installed a plywood ceiling across here. So up in the attic space, whatever radiant heat we have here, you're going to have just outdoor air coming up through the eaves and then pushing the hot air up through the ridge vents and out of the ridge, which should keep the attic space cool, which will in turn leave the conditioned space inside the workshop cool as well. So you do need to make a note, and if you look at the installation video, you'll see that I made a note not to cover up the gap here at the eave or the gap here at the ridge vent, to allow air to get up into the attic space and then to expel the hot air up through the top of the roof and through the ridge vent. And that makes for a very efficient system, and you get clean air circulation through here, so you're constantly expelling out whatever hot air that might be entering into your attic space, which will in turn keep your conditioned workshop space cool. So that's going to wind up the update on the rigid insulation. It's definitely a DIY project, something you can tackle, and it's not that expensive. Just do it over a couple of weekends or a couple of months, and you should be able to take care of that. So going on to my second update, the second update is going to be the DIY Mr. Cool mini split system that I installed. And again, I installed this approximately 2 years ago, so I now have 2 summers under my belt. I'll leave a link here to the installation video, and then I'll also leave a link in the video description below to where you can see the installation video for the DIY Mr. Cool mini split. As far as that unit goes, I sized to do the size of my workshop. Again, it's 25 by 30 by 10 foot high ceilings. I calculated, I think, 24,000 BTU. But I went to the next higher size unit. I actually installed a 36,000 BTU unit, simply because I'm here in South Central Florida. I knew the summers were going to be brutal, so I wanted to err on the side of oversizing a little bit. If I lived in a more temperate climate, like in the mid-Atlantic state and up north, or to be honest, I don't even know how well these systems really work in extreme cold climates, but at least in the South and probably in the Mid-Atlantic states, you should be fine. But I haven't had any issues with the DIY Mr. Cool mini split system. It was well worth the investment. The 36,000 BTU unit ran me roughly $2,500. This is a 220 volt system. It came with a wall-mounted Wi-Fi thermostat along with a remote control, which I've installed by my walk-through door, which is how I come in and out of the workshop. So it's right there on the door. And then I also installed the Mr. Cool app on the phone. I probably use the app more than anything. I have a summer schedule and a winter schedule. So I've got it pre-programmed Monday through Friday. It comes on at 10 a.m. and it cools down to 75 degrees, and then it shuts off at 5 p.m. That's just how I have my summer schedule set up. And then I have a winter schedule, which that one's only a month. And for the rest of the time, I just use the remote by the door and turn it on and off as needed. But quite frankly, I really primarily use it for the summer months. The 6 to 9 months of summer is really the only time I have the Mr. Cool mini split system running. As far as electric usage, I have 2 mini splits, one in our tiny house and then the one here in our workshop. I want to say with them both on, it's probably costing me about, I think I saw a spike of around $50 a month in my electric bill, which I don't think is bad at all for having 2 additional mini split units, along with the traditional air handler and condensing unit that we have in our house, which I believe is a 3-ton, maybe a 3.5-ton unit. So my monthly electric with pool pumps, a tiny house, it roughly ranges around $225 to $250 a month. As far as the update with the Mr. Cool unit, you do have to keep it maintained. In a workshop, you're creating a lot of dust. And it does come with some mesh filters, and you will need to clean those filters on a regular basis. I think I clean mine approximately every 3 months. I blow them out with the air hose. I take and wash them with just some soapy water and then let them dry out and then put them back in. But you have to be very diligent about keeping that clean. I do know that Jay Bates has a video on how he built a return air plenum for his mini split system, where I believe he's got 4 24-inch by 24-inch traditional air filters installed in this plenum, which helps filter the air so you don't get as dirty air getting into the actual air handling unit. And that might be something that I consider, which leads me to the third update, which would be the WIN 3410 air filtration system. And again, I'll leave a link here to the install and also in the video description below. That ran me approximately $250. I installed the air filtration system right here at my table saw, because this is the area where I have my table saw, my outfeed table, and it's where I do the majority of my sanding with my random orbital sander. So in this area, this is where I'm generating the majority of the dust in my workshop. So I just thought it made more sense to install the air filtration system right above the table saw. That way it will take and suck up the cloud of dust created by all the sanding. And then the WIN air filtration system has a 1 micron and then a 5 micron filtering. It's a 2-stage filtering system where you've got, I believe, a 1 micron paper filter, and then you've got 3 5 micron bag filters. So that really cleans the air. And then I've also situated it inside my workshop. So my WIN air filtration system is cleaning the air, and then it's discharging and blowing the air toward the opposite end of my workshop, which is where I have my DIY Mr. Cool mini split system installed. This way, clean air is being blown toward the Mr. Cool unit. the Mr. Cool unit is then sucking up the clean air and then conditioning it down to 75 degrees and then discharging that air at the other end of the workshop, making a circular motion inside the workshop, making it very efficient. And again, we'll take a look at that at the whiteboard. So here we are back at the whiteboard, and this is the workshop. And as you can see here, this is my table saw and outfeed table area where I'm doing the majority of my sanding with the random orbital sander. It's probably where I'm going to be generating the majority of the fine dust. This would be, you know, dust generated from the random orbital sander, and then it gets sucked up into the Win 3410 air filtration system, and then clean air is discharged toward the other end of the workshop where I have the Mr. Cool mini split system. So you've got clean air being discharged from the Win unit, and then it gets sucked into the Mr. Cool mini split, and then it discharges out of that as conditioned air at 75 degrees or whatever degrees that you set it up. So you can see the circular motion that's being created within the workshop, and then the motion being created in the attic space to get the radiant heat out of the attic space. This way your workshop is very energy efficient because the majority of the hot air is being dispersed through the ceiling and the ridge vent, and then you're basically just recirculating the conditioned air within your workshop. And I found this to be probably the most efficient way to cool my workshop, and that was my primary objective, was to keep the heat out and to keep the workshop as cool as possible. And for the final update, and I'll leave a link to the video here and I'll also leave a link in the video description below, is the update on the dust collection system. So I modified my dust collection system. In the past, I had a 2-stage cyclone system with the trash cans and the cyclone hood. And that worked out well for many years, but what I was doing was, in the first trash can, I was picking up a lot of the large to medium dust particles. Then in the second trash can, I would pick up the medium to small dust particles. And then in the bag, I would pick up the small to fine dust particles, and then I just had a bag filter. The problem with that is everything stays enclosed in your workshop, which isn't healthy. Even with the filter, you know, I realize it was a bag filter, but even if I'd have put a pleated rigid filter in there, you're still discharging everything within your workspace. So this upgrade was to disperse all the sawdust outside of the workshop, and basically just using a damper like you have a dryer vent on the side of your house. I have the same sort of dryer damper on the exterior of my workshop, and all the dust and wood shavings are dispersed outside the workshop so it doesn't stay inside the conditioned space of the workshop, which again helps with keeping the dust and the air in the workshop clean, keeping the Mr. Cool unit clean, and just making both the air filtration system and the Mr. Cool system work more efficient. And I highly recommend doing these 4 upgrades to your workshop. Again, as a recap, the rigid insulation ran me about $1,700 to $1,800. The Mr. Cool mini split ran me about $2,500. The Win air filtration 3410 ran me about $250, and then the upgrade to the dust collection system probably ran me about $50 to $100 in miscellaneous parts. Well, that's going to wrap up this video. I hope this video helps you out. And again, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to put them in the comments below, and I'll try to get them answered for you. If you're new to the channel and you like DIY and woodworking projects, then I recommend you smash that subscribe button. It's free and painless, and I'd also ask that you ring that bell icon. That way you'll be notified of all our upcoming videos. To all my existing subscribers, I really appreciate all the support you've given this channel. I'm Rick with the Ingrain Workshop. We'll see you next time. Have a wonderful day, and God bless.